For 15 years, Lucia Martin Romero lived in the quiet periphery of one of the most enigmatic figures in Hollywood. She wasn't a name splashed across headlines, nor a fleeting silhouette in the background of red carpet photos. She didn't appear in tagged Instagram posts or find herself the subject of whispers in the pages of glossy gossip magazines. And yet, she was always there, unseen but indispensable, gently choreographing the rhythm of Keanu Reeves' life from just outside the camera's frame. Lucia's entrance into Keanu's orbit happened quietly in the fall of 2010, at a time when the actor was deliberately retreating from the relentless tempo of mainstream fame. He had already turned his back on blockbuster demands, opting instead for roles that spoke to his soul rather than his bank account. Still mourning deep personal losses and worn thin by years in the public eye, Keanu wasn't seeking a comeback. He was searching for silence, structure, solitude. In short, he needed something far more elusive than a skilled assistant. He needed sanctuary. Enter Lucia. She hadn't come via a high-profile management firm or through industry connections lined with glitz. Her name didn't arrive on embossed stationery or through a polished executive referral. She was quietly recommended by one of Keanu's oldest and most trusted friends, someone who understood that what Reeves required wasn't another hyper-efficient handler or ego-puffing yes person. He needed a gatekeeper of serenity, someone with the ability to insulate his world without disrupting its fragile balance. Lucia fit the role with uncanny precision. With a background in diplomatic event coordination, she had navigated political minefields with quiet confidence. She spoke 5 languages, understood nuance like few others, and carried herself with a composed elegance that never veered into pretense. She moved through rooms like a breeze, present, refreshing, but never intrusive. She knew when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. Her silences weren't empty. They were thoughtful, watchful, grounding. For Keanu, whose life had been marked by tragedy, fame, and the kind of scrutiny that can erode even the most grounded soul, Lucia became more than an assistant. She was a stabilizing force, a guardian of the invisible details that kept his private world intact. While the rest of Hollywood chased chaos and spectacle, Lucia ensured that Keanu could move through life with quiet intention. He didn't need someone to fix problems. He needed someone who could prevent them. And in Lucia, he found that rare gift, someone whose presence calmed the noise, rather than added to it. Lucia learned quickly. She was a fast study, not just in the logistical sense, but in the subtle, emotional language of someone who had spent years building walls around himself. Within weeks, she had memorized Keanu's routines with a precision that suggested not just diligence, but intuition. She knew which mornings required silence, and which ones could carry a soft hello. She learned that the first few minutes of his day often set the tone for the rest of it, so she adjusted accordingly. If his posture was guarded, she gave him space. If his shoulders were relaxed and his voice open, she might mention a schedule change or ask if he wanted to try the new blend of coffee she'd sourced from a roaster he liked in Kyoto. She never flooded his mornings with updates or emails. The usual chaos of celebrity life, calls, press requests, travel schedules, security concerns, was carefully filtered by her hands before it ever reached him. During long, silent late-night drives from one quiet event to the next, Lucia kept the music low and her words even lower. She had learned to feel when conversation would soothe and when it would intrude. That kind of sensitivity wasn't taught in training manuals. It came from character and an innate ability to listen between the lines. Her job, on paper, was simple: manage the day-to-day mechanics of a life shaped by fame. But in reality, it was a role as layered and delicate as a spider's web, tasked with maintaining structure while protecting the rare piece Keanu had managed to carve out for himself in a world constantly demanding his attention. Lucia's days often began before dawn. She'd pull up to the gates of his property in the Hollywood Hills as the sky was still dark, the streetlights casting long shadows over the stone driveway. By then, she already had a sense of what kind of morning it would be. Not because he told her, but because she had learned to read the smallest cues. The way the curtains were drawn, the hush of the house, the cadence of his footsteps as he emerged. Sometimes his good morning was warm, offered with a faint smile. Other times, it was quiet, clipped, nearly a whisper. She adjusted accordingly. Some mornings, she left handwritten notes on the kitchen island, brief reminders, or words of encouragement scribbled in neat, looping script. Meeting moved to 11. Don't rush. You've done this before. Other days, she brewed his favorite herbal tea in a ceramic mug with a chipped lip, the one he refused to throw away because it had belonged to his sister. She never drew attention to these gestures. They were part of a rhythm she composed silently, day after day. But Lucia was never just an assistant. Over time, she became something else entirely, a quiet guardian of the little things, a living archive of the moments that never made headlines. She remembered the old Beatles song that made his eyes well up, unprompted, during a rainy drive up the Pacific coast. She remembered how he liked his boots, worn leather, polished just enough to shine but never too glossy. She knew the names of his childhood pets, the story behind the scar on his knee, the brand of soap he favored not because it was expensive, but because it reminded him of his mother's house. She never pried, never asked more of him than her role required. But Keanu, over the years, began to volunteer the corners of himself most people never got to see. A memory here, a joke there. Trust was never spoken of. It simply settled between them like dust on old books, quiet and unquestioned. Despite their closeness, Lucia maintained boundaries with almost military precision. She never gossiped, never posted on social media. She declined every dinner invite from industry people trying to mine her for stories. She didn't follow celebrity blogs, didn't answer curious DMs, and never let her name be publicly attached to his. Fans occasionally speculated online about the mysterious figure behind Keanu's seamless life. Was it a relative? A secret partner? A team of people? No one guessed it was one woman, unassuming, precise, invisible by design. Her anonymity was her armor, and she wore it well. In private, however, they had developed a kind of unspoken shorthand that defied explanation. A tilt of her head could signal a needed exit. A subtle nod could mean time to go. A glance at her watch might mean, this conversation's getting too personal. Over time, even silence became a language between them, deep, companionable, and never awkward. On the hard days, those few and far between but unmistakable, when the weight of grief pressed into his bones or the hollow ache of fame left him feeling untethered, Keanu would sometimes find himself seated beside Lucia on the balcony that overlooked the hills. They would sit there for minutes or hours, neither of them speaking, simply watching as the city below pulsed with life. She didn't ask what was wrong. She didn't try to fix it. She just was. Present, constant, quietly grounding him to a world that often felt like it was slipping through his fingers. To Lucia, loyalty didn't mean blind devotion. It meant holding space. It meant bearing witness. And for Keanu, in a world that often treated him like a projection or a myth, she was a rare thing indeed. Someone who saw him not as a star, but as a man. Flawed, quiet, deeply human, and worthy of peace. Their rituals became quietly sacred, unspoken yet unbreakable. These small acts stitched the fabric of their professional bond and personal understanding. Every September 2nd, without fail, Lucia would arrive with a chocolate cake from a tiny, family-run bakery tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop in Echo Park. It wasn't flashy, just dense layers of dark cocoa, a hint of espresso in the frosting, and shaved chocolate curls on top. She never asked if he wanted it. She simply brought it, year after year. And every year, Keanu would smile softly, almost shyly, and say the same thing. You remembered. On long international flights, Lucia curated playlists tailored to the mood of the trip. Sometimes it was obscure jazz, the kind with aching saxophone solos and forgotten melodies. Other times, it was lullabies from her Argentine childhood, bittersweet, haunting, and laced with nostalgia. She never explained the choices, and Keanu never questioned them. He would simply listen, head leaned back, eyes closed, carried away by the quiet care she embedded into every detail. He never asked her to create these mixes. Somehow, she always just knew what he needed before he did. There were other traditions, too. A lucky silver coin she'd place in his jacket pocket before difficult meetings. A thermos of herbal mate she left in his car during winter shoots. On the anniversary of his sister's death, she would light a candle on the windowsill of her small office and let it burn until morning. For almost 15 years, these quiet gestures defined the unspoken language between them. They were never grand, never visible to the world, but to Keanu, they were anchors. To Lucia, they were offerings. Then, in early 2025, something shifted. It came without warning, a message, delivered through official channels. Not from Keanu himself, but from a newly hired business manager whose name Lucia had only seen on brief internal memos. The message was curt, stripped of sentiment. It requested a meeting at the end of the week. The reason? Organizational restructuring. There was no preamble, no thank you for your years of service, no acknowledgement of the loyalty or history they shared. Just clean, cold wording. And just like that, her contract was terminated. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no slammed doors, no teary-eyed goodbye or slow-motion farewell. Keanu wasn't even in the country. He was in Japan, submerged in the final weeks of a physically demanding film shoot, his days swallowed by call times and night scenes. According to the manager, he was unreachable due to production commitments. The explanation was sterile, distant. Lucia didn't push back. She didn't protest or ask for a delay. She signed the necessary papers, gathered her belongings from a small office she had maintained in the guest house behind the main house, an office filled with tiny, forgotten tokens of 15 years, annotated calendars, reference books in 4 languages, a drawer of handwritten notes, a tea tin, the chipped ceramic mug he had once gifted her in passing. She packed quietly, precisely. When she was done, she left through the back gate, her footsteps barely audible on the gravel. She told no one, not the press, not friends in the industry, not even former colleagues who had long admired her professionalism from afar. And for a while, there was only silence. Those who knew her assumed she would fade into another life, perhaps take up a consulting position, or be quietly absorbed into another A-lister's world. She had the skill, the discretion, the impeccable track record. But that wasn't what happened. 3 weeks later, without fanfare, Lucia created a YouTube channel under her own name. The page was minimal, no links, no profile photo, just a single video. It was titled simply, 15 Years in the Background. The video was just over 4 minutes long. Filmed in a softly lit room, the frame was intimate. Lucia sat before a tall bookshelf crowded with personal mementos, worn paperbacks, a clay owl with one missing eye, a framed sketch of a coastal village, candles burned down to their bases. She wore a simple black sweater. Her hair was pinned back, her expression calm but unreadable. She never said his name. She never showed photos, never dropped dates or anecdotes specific enough to trace. There were no accusations, no bitterness, no scandal. Instead, she spoke about the nature of service, the quiet dignity of being present for someone else's life while disappearing from your own, about the paradox of being invisible even when you're indispensable, about the loneliness of holding someone else's world together and never once being asked what you might need in return. Her voice didn't tremble. It was measured, thoughtful, deliberate. But there were moments, barely perceptible, where her eyes glistened, not with regret, but with the weight of years spent in stillness, in silence. Journalists scrambled to find her identity. Online detectives pieced together the clues, and soon her name was trending. Still, Lucia declined interviews. She posted only one follow-up video, thanking people for their kindness, and saying she wasn't planning a tell-all, only sharing what it meant to dedicate yourself to someone else's peace. Weeks passed before any response came from Keanu Reeves. There was no statement from his team, no comment at press conferences. But those paying close attention noticed something unusual. At a film festival in Italy, Keanu arrived on the red carpet, wearing a pin on his lapel. It was a small clay owl, nearly identical to the one seen on Lucia's bookshelf in her video. No one in the press mentioned it. No one needed to. Those who knew understood. One journalist did manage to ask if he'd seen Lucia's video. Keanu smiled faintly and replied, "I think sometimes people speak most clearly when they're quiet." Then he walked away. Lucia turned down book deals, television offers, and reality show pitches. Instead, She launched a nonprofit called Stillness, designed to support professionals working behind the scenes in high-pressure industries, assistants, caregivers, aides. Her goal was to offer resources, counseling, and acknowledgement for people who, like her, made themselves invisible in service of others. Stillness grew fast. Donations poured in. Within a few months, Lucia had opened her first retreat center in Northern California. It was a peaceful place, filled with art, music, and silence. Former assistants and support staff began sharing their own stories, inspired by her bravery. One of the most viral moments came when a retired Hollywood driver, known only as Frank, posted, "Lucia said what none of us could. We were always there. We just weren't seen." A year later, on a rainy spring afternoon, a car pulled up quietly to the Stillness retreat. A tall man stepped out, dressed in jeans, boots, and a worn leather jacket. Lucia was in the garden, trimming herbs for tea. She looked up as he approached, her expression unreadable. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. "I saw the owl," she said softly. "I remembered," Keanu replied. They sat for a long while in the greenhouse, saying very little. No cameras, no audience. Just two people who had shared 15 years in quiet companionship, meeting again in the same silence that once defined their bond. Lucia never returned to the celebrity world. Her work with Stillness continued to expand. She became a speaker, reluctantly at first, on mindfulness, quiet leadership, and emotional labor. She published a small book of essays, not a memoir, called Side of the Frame. Keanu never publicly addressed her departure again, but in interviews, when asked about trust, he often smiled and quoted a phrase he once heard. "Confianza no es gana, it isn't asked for. It's earned." Their story was never one of drama or betrayal. It was about presence, service, and quiet loyalty in a loud world. What Lucia did next wasn't scandalous or sensational. It was simple. She reminded the world that even those in the background carry light, and when that light steps forward, the world listens. For more interesting upgrades, please like and subscribe to our channel.